Okay, so this tutorial is on historical argumentation. Now I know for a lot of students, this is not one of those subjects that they tend to like a lot. For me personally, I really like this one, and I get why. I like argumentation a lot. I'm an assistant debate coach. But on top of that, there's some really good reasons why you should be really excited about historical argumentation. For one thing, it's going to help you with your research. It's also going to help you with your writing. But I think most importantly, it's going to help you find your voice. Because you see, what historical argumentation does is it helps to teach you how to come up with an opinion, support it, and make it persuasive. And to also be critical thinking about other people's sources and other people's arguments to see which arguments have the most validity and which ones are the most persuasive to you. So let's jump in and take a look at how you can set up a really good historical argument.
A certain point of view?
Luke, you're going to find that many of the truths we cling to depend greatly on our own point of view.
So I want to start here at point of view or perspective. I remember as a kid going to watch the movie, Return of the Jedi. And when I saw this scene with Obi-Wan and Luke, I thought, this is a little crazy. What does he mean? Everything is up to our point of view or our perspective. But now I kind of get it. Argumentation in many ways is about perspective. It depends a lot on our opinion, what sources we're looking for our opinion, and what's the end goal that we're trying to achieve. So before we can really begin jumping into argumentation itself, I think it's really important for us to understand that in history, a lot depends upon context, point of view, and perspective. So in order to start off with argumentation, we really have to start off with the building blocks of an argument. Whenever you make an argument, there are going to be three big things that you always have to do in every argument. First, you're going to provide what's called a claim. Then you're going to provide what are called warrants. And then you're going to finish your argument with an impact or an analysis of the significance of the argument. So every argument starts off with what's called a claim. It's basically an opinion. An opinion is definitely not the same thing as a fact. Everybody's got opinions, but opinions are incredibly important in our arguments. Why? Well, because they're going to tell people where you stand on an argument. They're going to help to organize your argument. And they're going to give a specific direction in which your argument is going. You might notice, though, a lot of times that that's where a lot of people stop, is at their opinion. And that's why so often people can kind of challenge them and say, hey, prove what you're saying. So how do we make a differentiation between all the different opinions that are out there so that we can kind of determine which opinions have some more validity than other opinions? So the first type of warrant that we provide is what's called an analytical warrant. An analytical warrant is an abstract reason that supports the original opinion you provided. Now you might be noticing something here. An analytical warrant is just an opinion layered on top of another opinion. So while this is definitely a good way to support your argument, you don't want to stop here, because this could make your argument a little weak. You just have an opinion supporting another opinion. Okay, so how do we answer the challenge? How do we prove our argument if all we have are opinions layered on opinions? Well, we provide what's called concrete warrants. A concrete warrant is a specific example that demonstrates the argument and defends the argument we're making. In history, there are several ways we can do this. We can provide a quote from the time period. We can look to specific sources like newspapers or diary articles. We can also look to secondary sources from historians who have gone back and looked at evidence and provided us with specific examples that demonstrate why an argument is correct. What's important with the concrete warrant is we look to a variety of different sources to find concrete or specific evidence that can help to support our argument. We still have to finish the argument with the big question, why? Why is this important? Why are even we making the argument in the first place? This is our analysis that connects together the analytical, the concrete warrant with our opinion, ties it together and says why this argument is so important. So those are the basic building blocks of an argument: claim, warrants, and an impact. But historical argumentation gets a lot more complicated. So we need to take this to a much more advanced level, and I think you're ready for it. So whenever we think of complex historical arguments, we have to think of things like Persia, Sprite, or Spice. That's when we talk about relationships like social, political, religious, ideological, technological, or economic arguments. We make these arguments because we are analyzing in our argumentation about how historical events happened and how all these categories overlap with one another. So let's actually give this a shot. We're going to apply now our skills of argumentation to a very specific historical topic. The historical topic we're going to look at is cricket. How did cricket in the late 1800s shape society, and how was it shaped by society? So on the one hand, this probably seems kind of simple, right? We've just got to go on the internet and look up some of those most important cricket players, maybe look at a few of their statistics, compare and contrast how they did and what kind of audiences they attracted. That's one perspective or point of view on how we could argue about the history of cricket. But it doesn't go deep enough. It doesn't really answer the question. The question's asking about how cricket affected all the different types of relationships in society, both in England and in India in the late 1800s. I think we can go a little bit deeper. So whenever we start a historical argument, we want to look at context first. When did cricket take place? It took place in the late 1800s in Victorian England. This was the time when Britain saw itself as dominant in the world. It saw itself as a Christian country, spreading its values throughout the world through European imperialism. It was believed that within England, men and women had very specific roles. Men were public actors, meant to go out into the jungle of the marketplace to change the world. Women were supposed to stay at home in order to take care of and rear children. So, one argument about cricket is that cricket is not really just a sport, but a national sport. And it's a national British sport that ended up reflecting the values of masculinity, Christianity, and the belief that England was supposed to go out and civilize the world. So where would we go to test this idea that we have that cricket was really a national sport and it had much more to do with nationalism and with the idea of being a masculine Christian kind of a guy? Well, one way we could do it would be to look at concrete evidence. And one of the authors does this in an interesting way. Here's a quote from his article. The Victorians managed to preserve Georgian cricket in a more or less mummified form. A bouncing rubber ball, or a vulcanized one, tells a great deal about the meaning of cricket to the Victorian society. It was not a mere game like golf, to be trifled with by industrial technocrats. It was a valued and ancient institution which had, at all costs, to be buttressed and preserved in the face of rapid cultural and technological growth. In other words, what this author did was to look at the materials that they used in cricket, and he noticed that they'd continued to use wooden bats, leather balls, and leather mitts. His point was they were trying to preserve their traditions. So the evidence that he was looking for was looking at the basic materials used in cricket. And then he came to conclusions that he could use about social relationships, gender relationships, and political relationships based upon that evidence. Cool, so do we have to stop there and say that that's the obvious argument to make about cricket? It was a national sport for the British? Or maybe there's another place that we could look to and change our point of view, change our perspective. Let's take a look at where cricket was adopted. Cricket was adopted in one of the areas that Britain had taken over, India. How did they understand cricket? And how did it relate to their particular society? Was it a British sport demonstrating British nationalism, British Christianity, and British gender? Well, what if we changed our perspective a little bit and took a look at a different piece of evidence? In fact, one of the arguments made by the British at the time was that the reason why there was so much competition between Indians, Hindus, and Muslims was because of problems within India. But we don't really get that argument made by Indians themselves. Well, we actually have an argument from an Indian himself. In this case, it's an Indian Muslim named Muhammad Jinnah. Jinnah argued the following: even their Hindu brethren would rejoice in the Mohammedan success in a spirit of true sportsmanship. The cricket field has many lessons to teach in other walks of life. The brotherly feeling that prevailed throughout the play was no less remarkable, and he hoped their Hindu brethren as sportsmen would no less be pleased, but also rejoice at the Mohammedans winning the championship. Notice here that, unlike what the British said, Muhammad Jinnah was arguing that cricket was actually a way for all Indians to come together, Muslim and Hindu. So if we look at different pieces of evidence from different sources, we get a different point of view, a different perspective. It helps us not so much in argumentation to change everything we've argued about cricket, but to just add some layers on by looking at a different source. Oh, and by the way, here's why that particular source we're talking about is so important. Muhammad Jinnah was a Muslim who eventually made the argument much later in history that Muslims living in India could not live with Hindus. He actually pushed for Muslims to leave India, to move to the northern part of India, where he eventually called for a completely different nation, the nation of Pakistan, that became a Muslim nation, separate from the Hindu brethren that he talked about before. So here's the point. In our previous article example that we saw coming from a newspaper much earlier, it looks like Jinnah made a good argument that actually it was the British who were trying to divide and conquer. But later on, Jinnah would change his mind and call for a division between Muslims and Hindus. So even here we have to ask the question, what was Jinnah's point of view? What was his status as a Muslim within India? And what was his agenda in the argument that he was making? In other words, never be settled when you're looking at historical sources to just accept what somebody is saying. Always look at their context. Who are they? Where did they come from? What is their agenda? So I don't want you thinking about historical argumentation the way you probably did before this video. Before this, you probably thought of it as a fight you have with a friend or with parents or with somebody over politics. Think of historical argumentation as more of differing stories and layers of stories in which you go deeper and deeper into the subject. How do you do that? Realize that history is about point of view. It's about context. It's about the relationships in context. And it's about building up an argument based upon your opinion, the evidence, why this is significant, and then how we can go deeper into understanding the relationships that are there. If you do that, what's really exciting about historical argumentation is that it's really much more about discovery and going deeper and deeper into a subject matter. And that's what makes historical argumentation, to me, really exciting. Thanks a lot.